The Arizona sun was trying to kill Jake Thompson, and it was doing a damn good job. 3 days. That's how long he'd been tracking the bastards who stole his cattle through this godforsaken wasteland. His canteen had been bone dry for hours, his lips were cracked and bleeding, and his hoarse bell was about ready to collapse. But Jake kept riding because that's what stubborn cowboys do. They ride until they drop dead or find what they're looking for. What he didn't know yet was that he was about to find something far more valuable than stolen cattle. Jake crested another hill, and his heart sank straight through the desert floor. More red sand, more cacti, more nothing. He was beginning to realize he'd made the worst mistake of his life chasing thieves this deep into Apache territory. The sheriff had warned him. Everyone had warned him. But Jake's pride was bigger than his common sense. That pride was about to get him killed. Suddenly, Bell's ears shot up. Jake squinted through the heat waves and saw movement. 3 figures emerging from behind rocks like desert ghosts. His hand went straight to his gun, but something made him freeze. These weren't bandits. They were young Apache women, maybe late teens or early 20s, moving with a grace that made the desert look easy. They weren't afraid of him. That was the first shock. The tallest one stepped forward, braids adorned with feathers, dark eyes studying him like he was a puzzle. "You are lost, cowboy," she said in perfect English. "This is not a place for your kind to wander alone." Jake tried to speak, but his throat was sandpaper. "Ma'am," he croaked, "I'm tracking stolen cattle. Been riding. Days without water." The second woman had the most beautiful painted symbols on her face, lightning bolts that seemed to move in the desert heat. She carried a small decorated pot. Water. Jake's entire world became that pot. The third woman, the youngest, had serpent patterns winding up her arms. She watched him with calculating intelligence that made Jake nervous despite his desperation. "Stolen cattle?" the first woman asked. "Many cattle passed through recently. Men with pale skin drove them toward canyon country." Jake's eyes widened. These women had seen the thieves. But more importantly, "Please," he whispered, pointing at his empty canteen. "Water." The 3 women spoke rapidly in Apache. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he understood the argument. The youngest didn't want to help him. The others seemed more sympathetic. Finally, the lightning bolt woman approached with her water pot. Then she pulled it back. "You must understand, cowboy. Our people and your people have not always been friends. Why should we help you?" Jake met her gaze. Despite the fact that he was literally dying of thirst, he recognized the validity of her question. "You're right to be cautious, ma'am. I can't speak for all my people, but I can speak for myself. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to recover what was stolen and get home to my family." The serpent-marked woman studied his face intensely, then spoke to her companions. "My sister says you have honest eyes," the tall woman translated. "But eyes can lie as easily as mouths." "That's true," Jake admitted. "But I'm asking for your help not because I deserve it, but because I need it. And if I can help you in return, I will." More rapid Apache conversation. The youngest pointed toward the horizon and made gestures indicating danger. The others nodded gravely. "There is something you should know, cowboy. The men who took your cattle, they are not the only danger in these lands. Other men have come. Bad men with many guns. They seek to harm our people and claim our sacred places." Jake's blood went cold. He'd heard rumors in town about armed groups terrorizing the territory. "How many?" "Many," the lightning woman replied. "They wear symbols of hate and speak of driving out all who are not like them. They have threatened our village." The youngest woman suddenly spoke urgently, pointing at a dust cloud rising in the distance. They were all about to die. "They come," the tall woman said. "We must hide." They moved fast. Jake led Bell behind a boulder while the 3 Apache women positioned themselves with practiced efficiency. The dust cloud grew. Soon, Jake heard hooves and rough voices carried on desert wind. "How many?" Jake whispered to the tall woman. Ayanna, he learned her name was. Too many to fight, she replied, but maybe too few to search everywhere. Jake peered around the boulder and his stomach dropped. 12 heavily armed men wearing bandanas and carrying enough firepower to level a small town. These weren't ordinary outlaws. They moved with military precision, wearing matching symbols Jake recognized, a notorious hate group that had been terrorizing the territory. The lightning bolt woman, Kira, touched Jake's arm and pointed. Those two drove your cattle. We saw them yesterday. Jake's jaw tightened. He'd found his thieves. But now a much bigger problem loomed. These men were hunting the women who'd just saved his life. The leader, a scarred man with dead eyes, shouted orders to spread out. Someone's been through here recently. Fresh tracks. Could be Apache scouts. Ayanna's youngest sister, Nieli, whispered urgently to her companions. Jake couldn't understand, but her tone conveyed pure terror. What is it? My sister says these men burned the trading post at Willow Creek last week, Ayanna explained. They killed 3 innocent people, including a child. Jake's blood boiled. He'd heard about the Willow Creek massacre. These weren't just cattle thieves. They were murderers who killed anyone who didn't fit their twisted worldview. The riders circled closer. Jake realized if they were discovered, these 3 women would face horrible fates. His hand moved to his gun, but Kira shook her head. 1 gun against 12. That is not courage. That is foolishness. But as the riders drew nearer, Jake saw no other option. He was about to draw his weapon when Nieli grabbed his wrist. She pointed to her serpent markings, then to something on the ground. Jake followed her gaze and saw a small opening between rocks, barely large enough for a person. And here's where it got strange. Nieli's serpent markings seemed to point directly at this hidden passage, as if they were a map. Ayanna noticed and nodded slowly. The sacred markings. They mark the old paths. Jake didn't understand, but when the women moved toward the opening, he followed. They squeezed through one by one, Belle somehow fitting behind them. The passage opened into a hidden chamber within the rock formation, large enough to conceal all of them comfortably. As they caught their breath in cool shadows, Ayanna explained in hushed tones. Our markings are not just decoration, Cowboy. They are maps, warnings, and protections passed down through generations. Kira pointed to her lightning bolts. These show the paths of water through the desert. When our people see these marks, they know I can guide them to springs and oases. Nieli touched the serpents on her arms and spoke in English for the first time. My markings show the hidden places, caves, passages, safe paths through dangerous country. Our grandmother painted these on me when I became a woman. Jake stared in amazement. So you're like, living maps of the desert? More than maps, Ayanna said, showing him geometric patterns on her face. These markings show my clan, my family history, my skills as a healer and negotiator. They tell our people who I am and what I can offer. Outside, they could hear riders searching and cursing. The leader was growing frustrated, shouting orders and threats. Jake realized these women had just saved his life, using knowledge preserved for centuries in the form of traditional markings. But why? Why are you helping me? He asked quietly. Your people have every reason to distrust white men, especially with groups like this terrorizing the territory. The 3 sisters exchanged glances. Ayanna responded, because good people must help each other regardless of skin color. My grandmother taught us that hatred only breeds more hatred. The men outside, they hate anyone different. We will not let that hatred make us like them. Hours passed before hooves finally faded. When they emerged, the sun was setting, painting the desert in brilliant oranges and purples. The riders had moved on, but Jake knew they'd be back. They're looking for your village, he said. You're not safe. We know, Kira replied grimly. We have been moving our people to hidden places our ancestors knew, but there are so many who need protection. Elders, children, families with nowhere else to go. Jake made a decision that would change everything. What if I helped you? I know people in town, good people who could stand against these murderers, and I owe you my life." Neely studied him carefully, her intelligent eyes seeming to read his soul. Finally, she spoke. "You would fight beside us? Against your own kind?" "They're not my kind," Jake said firmly. "My kind doesn't murder children or burn down trading posts. My kind doesn't terrorize innocent families." As night fell, the four of them sat around a small concealed fire Kira had built, using techniques that produced almost no visible smoke. They shared water and dried meat while planning. "The markings that saved us today," Jake said. "There's more to them than you've told me, isn't there?" Ayanna smiled mysteriously. "Much more, Cowboy Jake. Tomorrow, you will begin to understand why our ancestors were wiser than anyone realizes." What Jake didn't know was that tomorrow would bring a battle that would test everything he thought he knew about courage, wisdom, and survival. Dawn broke with urgency that set everyone on edge. Nieli had awakened before the others, her hand pressed to the ground, as if listening to something the earth was telling her. When Jake opened his eyes, she was already speaking rapidly to her sisters. "What is it?" "The riders split up during the night," Ayanna explained, face grave. "Most went toward our village, but some doubled back. They know we helped you escape yesterday." Jake's heart hammered. They'd put a target on these women by accepting their help. Kira stood and gathered her water pot, checking the markings on her arms like consulting a complex map. "There is a way to reach our village first, but it is dangerous. The old paths through canyon country. Our ancestors used them to escape enemies long ago." Jake saddled Belle quickly. "Lead the way. We need to warn your people." As they set out, Nieli began explaining more about their markings. "Each symbol connects to others," she said, pointing to a spiral on her forearm. "This one shows a hidden water source, but only when you see it with this one." She indicated a small diamond near her wrist, which means it flows underground. The knowledge was incredibly complex. Jake realized what he'd initially seen as decorative tattoos were actually a sophisticated information system that had allowed Apache people to survive harsh desert conditions for generations. They traveled for hours through terrain that would have been impossible for Jake to navigate alone. Kira's lightning markings guided them to water sources that appeared to be nothing more than dry rock until she showed where to dig. Nieli's serpent patterns revealed passages through cliff faces that looked completely solid from a distance. Then, Ayanna suddenly held up her hand for silence. In the distance, gunfire and shouting. They were too late. The attack had already begun. "How many people are down there?" Jake asked. 40 families, Ayanna replied, voice tight with worry. "Many children and elders who cannot fight." Jake studied the canyon walls, thinking hard. An idea began forming, desperate, but possibly their only chance. "Those markings of yours," he said to Neely. "Do they show all the hidden passages around your village?" She nodded. "Every path, every cave, every secret way." "Why?" "Because I think I know how to turn the tables on those murderers." Jake explained his plan quickly. The three sisters listened, expressions shifting from skepticism to growing excitement. It was risky and would require perfect timing, but it might save their people. "You would do this?" Kira asked. "Risk your life for people you do not even know?" "Those markings saved my life yesterday," Jake replied. "Now I want to return the favor." They split up according to plan. Ayanna descended toward the village to organize defense. Kira used her knowledge of water sources to position herself strategically. Jake and Neely made their way to the canyon rim above the attacking riders. From their vantage point, Jake could see the situation below. The heavily armed riders had the village surrounded, but they clearly didn't know the terrain. They were positioned in what they thought were defensive positions, but Nieli's markings revealed these locations to be traps. "There," Nieli whispered, pointing to small marks on her arm resembling falling rocks. That entire cliff face is unstable. In the old stories, our warriors would cause rock slides to stop enemy attacks. Jake studied the cliff and saw what she meant. Someone with the right knowledge could trigger a controlled avalanche that would block the attacker's escape route without harming the village below. They worked their way along the canyon rim. Jake used his rope and ranching experience to secure himself, while Nieli guided him to exactly the right spots to place charges they'd improvised from his rifle cartridges. Below, shooting continued, but Jake could see Ayana had successfully organized villagers into defensive formation using natural rock barriers the attackers couldn't see. "Now?" Jake asked, hand on the improvised trigger. Neely consulted her markings one more time, reading them like a complex engineering manual. "Now," she confirmed. The explosion echoed through the canyon like thunder. Tons of rock crashed down, creating a natural wall that blocked the attacker's main escape route. But the plan was only half complete. Kira had positioned herself at the water source the attackers were using to rest their horses. As the rock slide forced them to retreat toward her location, she revealed herself and shouted in English, "Your horses need water, but this spring belongs to the Apache people." The confused riders, thinking they faced only a single young woman, charged toward her position. But Kira's lightning markings had guided her to a spot where flash flood channels converged. When she pulled away rocks she'd carefully positioned, water from the spring flowed into ancient channels that created a muddy barrier, trapping several horses and riders. Meanwhile, Ayana had used her knowledge as a healer to create smoke from desert plants that disoriented the remaining attackers without seriously harming them. The geometric patterns on her face had indicated which plants to use and how to combine them for maximum effect. Within minutes, the seemingly organized attack became complete chaos. Half the riders were trapped by rock slide, others were stuck in mud. The rest were blinded by smoke and confused by terrain they couldn't read. Jake and Nieli made their way down to the village, where they found Apache people had successfully captured most of the attackers. The leader, the scarred man who'd terrorized the territory, sat tied up, glaring with impotent rage. "How?" he snarled when he saw Jake. "How did you know our movements?" Jake looked at the three sisters, who stood together with quiet dignity despite having just won an incredible victory. "I had teachers," he said simply. "People who understand this land in ways you never could." But the story doesn't end there, because what happened next would change the entire territory forever. Over the following days, as they waited for the territorial marshal to arrive and collect the prisoners, Jake learned even more about the markings and their meanings. Each pattern told multiple stories, practical information about survival, spiritual beliefs about the connection between people and land, and historical records of the tribe's experiences. "Our markings are our libraries," Ayana explained one evening as they sat around a fire in the village center. "White people keep their knowledge in books that can be lost or burned. We keep ours on our bodies, in our memories, passed from generation to generation." Jake had recovered his stolen cattle, but more importantly, he'd gained something far more valuable, an understanding of a culture that had thrived in harsh conditions through wisdom accumulated over centuries. When the marshal finally arrived with a large posse, he was amazed to find all 12 notorious raiders captured with minimal violence. "How did you manage this, Thompson?" he asked. Jake gestured toward the three sisters, whose markings caught the firelight beautifully. "I had help from people who know things that books can't teach and maps can't show." As Jake prepared to return to his ranch, Neely approached him with a small pot of paint. "You are friend to our people now," she said. "Will you accept our mark of friendship?" Jake held out his arm. With careful strokes, she painted a simple but meaningful symbol, a pattern showing safe passage and welcome among the Apache people. It was his first marking, and though it would fade with time, its meaning would stay with him forever. Years later, Jake would become known throughout the territory as a man who could travel safely through any part of the desert, welcomed by Apache people who recognized the faded but still visible symbol on his arm. He never forgot the lesson he learned that day, that wisdom comes in many forms, and the people who seem most different from us often have the most valuable knowledge to share. The three sisters continued to use their markings to guide and protect their people, and their village became known as a place where Apache and white people could meet in peace and mutual respect. The markings that had once been their saving grace became symbols of hope for a better future, where different cultures could learn from each other instead of fighting. And whenever travelers asked Jake about the faded marking on his arm, he would smile and say, "That's the story of how 3 Apache women's markings became my saving grace and taught me that true strength comes not from guns or horses, but from understanding and respecting the wisdom of others." But here's the real question. How many of us today are ignoring the wisdom right in front of us because it comes from people who seem different? How many living libraries are we letting disappear because we're too proud to listen? Jake almost died from that pride. He almost missed the chance to learn something that would change his life forever. Don't make the same mistake. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the wisdom that exists in cultures different from your own, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like this, stories about bridges built between people who were supposed to be enemies, these are the stories that can change the world, one mind at a time.